Hi, and welcome to another show of Life Addictions, The Recovery Show. My name is John Lausch, and I am a certified recovery specialist here in the state of Florida. Our show talks about addiction and recovery, no matter what addiction you have. Drugs, alcohol, food, nicotine, and a lot of behavioral addictions that a lot of us experience out there. For instance, procrastination addiction is a big one. Sex and love addiction is a big one. Spending addiction in today's economy is a big one. We also cover criminal addiction. And, when I say criminal addiction, those are two words back to back, criminal addiction, that really sound harsh. But I got to tell you, if you're getting free cable and you're not paying for it, if you're bouncing checks, that is probably the lowest form of criminal addiction, but it's against the law. And a lot of us do it without knowing that we're, setting some kind of pattern up for us. And these patterns, whether it's that or drugs or alcohol, can sometimes go on for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. Today we have a very special guest on, like we do every week on our show. Dr. Phil Henry is a PhD. He is an associate professor with the Palm Beach Atlantic University. Dr. Phil Henry, welcome. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what it is you do.
Well, John, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I teach at Palm Beach Atlantic University. I teach in a graduate counseling department, and I have about 200 students there. They major in mental health, marriage and family, addiction. I teach the human development course, the substance abuse course. I do some of the internships as well.
You teach a lot of the professionals that are out there. I was talking to a colleague last week, and he's like, oh yeah, my wife studied under him. So yeah, a lot of the drug and alcohol professionals out here in South Florida have been taught by you.
It's a blessing to have so many and to kind of go out in the community and see students. Yeah. I've now been there 12 years, so after you've been there for a while, I think we've had about 850 graduates. So that means that in a lot of agencies there's a student or some family member actually of a student. So that's kind of fun.
That's got to make you feel great. So you are a doctor of psychology, but you specialize in addiction.
Yes, I did my work at Temple University. I did some work and research in schizophrenia with doing research with Clozaril and Risperdal, which are drugs that first introduced in the United States. And then I did drug and alcohol groups in an adolescent center, alternative school, which probably was the most challenging place. I did drug and alcohol groups.
Yeah, really?
Because if you've ever, I used to say that working with adolescents in groups with drug and alcohol was kind of like spinning in the wind. Yeah. I mean, it has its challenges. And
now, was this recently or years ago?
That was years ago when I was first starting out. And then I went and did forensics, which is in a state mental hospital in prison, doing groups with people who were mentally ill, who had been charged with crimes, but who also had addictions in the state hospital forensics unit.
As you can see, we have a great guest on today. Dr. Phil Henry is very knowledgeable about addictions. And Doctor, it seems like you covered a lot of ground, and a lot of our viewers are out there watching, and they have some of these things that you're talking about: addiction, criminal stuff, kids that are juveniles, teenagers that are involved with addiction. What can you say to those viewers that are watching? One of the questions we ask here is, how do you get a person to get clean and sober, whether it's a drug or an alcohol or even a behavioral addiction? What are some of the things you can, I know that's a...
Well, if I had the answer to that in one simple thing, I probably would have a lot more money than I have.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things you see is often is a maturing process happening in people. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that your brain doesn't fully function until you're probably about 25 years old. So your frontal lobe, the part of your brain that's making decisions, planning, organizing, doing that process, it's probably not complete until 25. We have people, a lot of times, if they start an addiction before that, we're trying to get them to think logically, think about the consequences, thinking about their behaviors when the software hasn't been installed yet.
Right.
And even the hardware in some cases. So if you take somebody 17, 18 years old, they're probably going to, I don't know about you, but I made better decisions as I got older. When I was 16, I hate to say it, I kind of was, very impulsive.
Right.
Maybe a little impulsive still, but not as bad as when I was 16 years old. So a part of that is to help people be safe and make wise decisions until their bodies and their brains kind of catch up with them, kind of help them with that process a little bit. Second thing I would say is most of our decisions are couched in other decisions. And that, I'm going to call it the meaning that we make out of things is very, very important. So in other words, when you have an experience and you think about, oh, I lost my job, or I lost a loved one, or I'm struggling in school.
Yeah.
The way you understand that is very, very important because it can send you on a negative trajectory or a positive trajectory. And if you begin to build these negative thoughts about the situation, about yourself, I don't think we can tolerate that very much.
Yeah.
So we try to do something then to tolerate those negative feelings about ourselves or the situation. Aaron Beck said that depression was built on 3 different things: negative view of the past, negative view of the future, and negative view of yourself. He said it was like a structure. Whenever we get those 3 things, we tend to do something to fight against that in some way.
Yeah. Now, Aaron Beck, he was a founder of CBD, kind of the behavioral therapy.
Yeah, CBT, yeah.
And, I've been studying that lately a little bit, doing some research about that. And it really is intensive. You have to look at your patterns, your behaviors,
right.
And how that affects your thought process. And so it really is a study of self.
It's a study of self, and it's somewhat training yourself in awareness. So, for instance, I have a thought right now. A thought goes through my mind. I begin to say to myself, gosh, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Someone said, well, would you redo this? Suddenly I say to myself, I'm a bad person. I can't never get it right.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? All of a sudden you say to yourself, oh my gosh, that came from them asking me to redo it. I have a set of rules which says I must be perfect. That goes down to this core belief about myself. If I'm not perfect, I can't be loved. I can't do things right. I'm not worthy. Then I have to defend against that in some way, and suddenly I feel hurt. I feel negative about myself just because someone says, would you mind redoing this? Again, the awareness of that process is very hard. Most of the time we do it in a split second, and I have that feeling. And what people why they end up using is, I can't tolerate that. I go right to the using.
Yeah.
Right? I can't tolerate it. I go right to that point.
What a great, logical, academic perspective you just gave us on getting a person to change and look at themselves and rebuild the blocks like A, B, C.
Right.
It really is, in a sense, that simple and that difficult, all the same answer. There's so many different ways to change. We have so many different people on that are CEOs, leaders in the fields. We had a great guest on last week, and we're going to have more guests like that. He was from a Christian-based recovery center that was free, and I promise you, viewers, we're going to have more of that, because with today's economy, we need more services that you don't have to pay $10,000, $15,000 a month to get a loved one clean and sober. But back to Dr. Phil and your perspective on recovery and just rebuilding. I've studied under some great leaders of change, but this is one of the core building blocks that you're describing to us, looking at self. And not so much, a lot of people come on, and it's almost like they jump over a lot of this stuff, and they go to the spiritual aspect.
Right.
And how that's going to cure or help us. And that does.
Well, I think the spiritual aspect does help because it helps you in some places re-understand yourself.
Yeah.
But just putting an overlay of spiritual things on things, and saying, well, And I've had a lot of experience in this.
Yeah.
In another life, I used to be a minister, so
Okay.
that's another story. But the reason why I got involved in psychology is I felt that a lot of people just put a spiritual veneer on things. They weren't really willing to look at themselves and be honest about what was going on to them and look at their emotions and their thoughts. And as a result, what happened was they weren't having real change. So I think that insight into yourself, regardless of what your spiritual background, gives you some perspective on how you can change and what you need to change.
Yeah. You know, one of the people I studied under was Tony Robbins, Robbins Research Center. Dr. Richard Bandler, I was with him in Orlando for several months. And you know, the cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, he does the whole NLP thing. And you know, it's really like cognitive behavioral therapy light, the NLP thing.
That's an interesting process where you're shifting and thinking about different things and moving those around. So I think there's a lot of ways to cut it. I think in addiction, the major thing you go back to is things are so wired together. And what I mean that they're so tight together. But there's never a place for a break where the person says, no, wait a minute, what am I doing in this process, right? Whenever I have a feeling, whenever I have that negative thought followed by that negative feeling, I jump right to the drugs, the alcohol, whatever that thing is, the shopping, the whatever, so quickly that I never have a chance to go, oh my gosh, I'm lonely. That's what it is. It's Friday night, I'm by myself. It's not that I just want to drink, whatever. I feel lonely, and if I'm home by myself, I'm a loser, and I don't want that feeling, so I'm going to go out and do these things so I don't have that feeling.
You know, I really love the way you're laying this out for us. I love the way you're explaining it. It really is a perspective we really haven't heard that much of. I mean, it's really one of the building blocks. It's the meat and potatoes of, you know, getting better, no matter what ails you.
Right.
And you really do come off and explain it simply. And it's a very complex thing, and that's a lot. That's talent. When you can explain something that's very complex, and it's easy to understand.
That probably comes from students asking me so many questions. You have to go back and you have to say, well, what really is the important point here? Right. If I'm going to start to do therapy with somebody, what do I say to them? What do I ask them? What do I focus on in some way? And I think the meaning that we make from experiences and our thinking process in that is very, very important, both from a spiritual standpoint, but even the mechanism to even get up to a spiritual standpoint. I think that sometimes people with spiritual backgrounds set the cookie so high up on the shelf that people say, you know what, I would love to be able to believe all that, but I can't even get started. I mean, you're asking me to do something like to do high school work, and I'm just starting out in elementary school. Maybe I'll get to that at some point, but it's very difficult for me to do it right now.
Our guest is Dr. Phil Henry, Associate Professor at Palm Beach Atlantic University. You are watching Life Addictions Recovery Show. We are going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to ask Dr. Phil Henry about how it is neurotransmitters work in the detoxing of drugs and alcohol and some other things. And as you see, he's going to explain it in such a way that is going to be simple to understand, and you're going to want to tune back in. Please come back. We'll be back in just a minute. Hi, John Lausch here, and you're watching WRPBI TV. Hi, and welcome back to Life Addictions Recovery Show. Our guest, Dr. Phil Henry, and you just saw a commercial about our product we have here at Life Addictions Recovery Program. It's called the Recovery Pod. You know, we're talking about reprogramming the brain, learning, trying to get out of an addiction, and one of the laws of learning is the law of repetition and the law of recency. So hearing something over and over again and hearing it, you learn what you hear the latest, is what our product, the Recovery Pod, offers. You open it up, you turn it on, and you hit play. Very simple. It's already downloaded, as you've seen. It's a great product. We have one for drugs, we have one for alcohol, and we're coming up with one specifically for prescription drug addiction. Doctor, what do you think about a product like this that's portable, that's easy to use? It works best if you're in 12-step meetings or in some kind of counseling, but if you don't have any of that, it's a great way.
I think the repetition is actually a secret, because what you're actually trying to do is reprogram your thinking.
Yeah.
So the more often that you hear something, the more you learn it. I'm doing a distance program in psychopharmacology at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and I have all my lessons on the iPad. I play those over and over again.
Yeah.
I learn those lessons. If you're interested in recovery, if you play those messages all over and again, you'll learn those until where they'll be second nature. You know,
Yeah.
you don't even have to think about it. You start to think that way before you even know.
You really do have to reprogram your thoughts, and that's a great way to do it. Check out our website at lifeaddictions.com for more information on that. Doctor, I want to ask you about some of the recent work you're doing. You did a lot of work in your career. I'm very impressed, I must say. But your latest work is very interesting, and it falls in line with how to get a person to get better, but physically.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about how your neurotransmitter work is going.
Well, I'm very excited about that, because I think that many times an addiction is simply a compensatory strategy, a way of dealing with the way that our minds work. For instance, I have a little attention deficit.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I jump around and think about different things. Well, I didn't know that one of the neurotransmitters that I'm lacking in is dopamine. And a little bit of norepinephrine. And then what I found is when I tested my neurotransmitters, I was low in these things. Bringing those low transmitters up to a normal balance level, or taking the ones that are high and bringing them down, brings the brain sort of into sync with each other. And most addictions, or a lot of addictions, are attempt to kind of compensate for where the brain is lacking. There's different receptors of dopamine. D2 is the one that all the pleasure things seem to hit.
And we all have these, right?
We all have all these neurotransmitters.
Right.
Dopamine, norepinephrine.
They're in our body,
serotonin.
they're in our cells.
In our body, in our cells, in our brain, at certain levels. Naturally, some people are, let's say, low in dopamine. If I'm low in dopamine, I will try to do things to raise that dopamine level.
Right.
Eating, for instance, will raise it 2 to 3 hours. So when we eat, we'll raise that dopamine 2 to 3 hours. When I go shopping, for some people, gambling, sex, alcohol, dopamine, it's going to boost that, and we're going to feel, that I feel better, I feel kind of normal. So what happens is, after a while, we begin to say, well, that's the way I'm going to feel better or normal, because that's low. Now, what happens when you go into recovery? When you go into recovery, the dopamine level drops back to where it is normally, and you say to yourself, oh my God, this is horrible. My life is horrible. I feel horrible. You know, is my whole life going to be this way? Well, part of it is diet, part of it is exercise, but you can also take some supplements that raise the neurotransmitters that are low up to a higher level, and then for the first time in your life, some people feel normal. I had somebody who was taking Xanax, having panic attacks. They started taking more and more Xanax, more and more Xanax. You know what happens? It's like digging a hole to get out of it. The more you take the Xanax, the better you feel, but then if you stop the Xanax, you have panic attacks.
Yeah. So many side effects.
Feel like you want to die.
Yeah.
So there are some products that boost GABA, which is
another neurotransmitter.
Neurotransmitter that is in Xanax. It's what Xanax makes, basically. Actually, what alcohol makes, too.
Okay.
It keeps a lid on everything, keeps everything down. But if you give your bodies the raw material to make that, your body makes enough GABA and it lowers it naturally.
So you have a way, through a urine test,
Yes.
to find out what the different levels of a person's neurotransmitters are.
Right.
And then if you see some that are fine, that's good. If you see some that are low, you give them some of this raw material to help them produce it themselves.
Absolutely, and some of it is as easy as eating. Most of the neurotransmitters are made from amino acids, which are made from proteins. So, do you ever notice, I've had some people who are bodybuilders and they work out, and what they discovered is, oh my gosh, I'm more focused, I'm more in tune with things, and you're like, well, how does that work? Well, you're giving your body the raw materials to make those neurotransmitters and balance it. And you often see people in recovery, right, start to get in recovery, and what do? They might start to go to the gym, they start to eat differently, they pay attention to their, well, they're improving across the board.
Yeah.
And then you don't go back to the addiction because your life is actually completely different. You've grown sort of beyond that point, and you can't make yourself small and go back in there anymore.
Yeah. So what are some of these, you mentioned a couple of raw materials, but specifically, so a person can go to their local pharmacy and get a multivitamin that's heavy in...
Well, here's the problem. And
or is it more specific than
This is probably why the testing is important.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. You might be low in something and you need it boosted, or you might be high in something
and you need it lowered.
And you need it lowered. And guessing is not really...
Right.
I'm not too bad at guessing, and I guess wrong about myself.
Yeah.
So my hit rate on that is not very good. I thought I was actually high in a lot of things. I'd like, well, that's the reason why I have a problem with attention. I think I'm probably too high. I have too much. And when I tested it was low. I was like really surprised. The other thing which is important is some of the medications that you get. For instance, and people have to be careful with this, with Paxil and Zoloft and some of the antidepressants actually have an effect on the other neurotransmitters. So if you think about this, it's almost like a teeter-totter, where when you mess around with one, it moves other ones. So you actually have to be careful about just going out to the store and going, well, I'm going to go get a whole, and
a bunch of vitamins.
Well, if you're addicted,
Yeah.
more is better. So
Yeah.
a guy was telling me, just take a handful of different kind of vitamins and going like, well, I'm doing the best I can do. I'm taking a lot of vitamins. That must be a good idea.
Yeah.
Not always the best idea.
I'm going to bring this back to addiction, and for the viewers that are watching, it really is about our thoughts, about how we feel about our bodies and how our bodies make us feel. So, Dr. Phil, there's so much more to cover. We need to have you back.
I'd love to come in
on another show to talk more about this. We still have some time. For some of our viewers, so you don't see patients, you teach?
I see some clients.
You see some clients.
I have a small practice because I teach for the most part.
Yeah.
But I see some clients, and I work with some drug and alcohol programs just to, institute some of this. I think probably in about 10 years, this neurotransmitter testing is probably going to be widely used. Integrative psychiatry and integrative medicine is headed in that direction. But right now, it's a lot easier just to sort of give somebody a pill than it is to do the testing and really do the information.
And the testing is getting more and more streamlined, isn't it?
It's getting much better.
Yeah.
I think there was only one place in the country that was doing it a couple years ago. Now we're doing more. I'm doing an actual conference on it coming up in September. I think it's being more accepted.
Doctor, do you have a website or anywhere where we can see some more information, or maybe your upcoming conference?
Well, Neuroscience is one of the companies that I'm working with.
Okay.
And they have a lot of information on their website. It's neurorelief.com.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to be speaking at the American Association of Christian Counselors up in Nashville. They have about 6,000 to 8,000 counselors that are going to show up at the Opryland Hotel. So,
Dr. Phil Henry, ladies and gentlemen, from Palm Beach Atlantic University. It has really been a pleasure, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and we're going to have Dr. Henry back on, I guarantee you. My name is John Lausch, and thank you so much for tuning in again to Life Addictions Recovery Show.